Now our second lesson is political obligation. So in obligation, first we are going to see the individual's duties. So an individual has to follow the rules of behavior in society for his own good and for the good for others. Society makes unwritten rules of behavior in the form of customs and usage, and a state makes written rules known as laws. The individual has to follow certain do's and don'ts in state. These are his positive and negative duties or obligation. For example, payment of tax fully and regularly is a positive duty, and refraining from harassing, troubling, or robbing others is a negative duty. This is about the individual's duty. Then obligation is classified in two ways: moral and legal obligation. So moral obligation means moral approach. Moral obligation means according to the moral principles of society in which he lives, individual shall discharge certain obligation or duties: serving old parents, being helpful to neighbors, showing kindness to animals, being friendly and respectful to guests, treating the physically handicapped with compassion, sharing the sorrow of others in a deep distress, and being considerate towards the sick are some of the moral obligations. But if the individual fails to discharge them, he cannot be legally punished. Society is not competent to use any coercive power against the individual who is different to his moral duties. Means if you fail to follow your moral duties, then the government cannot punish you. But if you fail to follow this legal obligation or the practical approach, then you will be punished. Legal obligations which are prescribed by the state are on a different level altogether. If these duties are not done by the individual, the state swings into action to punish him. If he fails to pay tax or violates other laws, the individual will be punished according to the law. So here we have seen the classification of obligations. Next is the political obligation. A political system serves only when people accept it and render obligation means obedience to it. Political obligation is the obedience of the people that is important and essential. So what are the grounds of political obligation? In a state, obedience to laws is the general rule and disobedience is rare. Most of the people obey the laws and only a few disobey them and meet the punishment. The government of a state can function smoothly and effectively only if the majority obeys laws. Lawbreakers who form a small minority can be controlled and punished. But if a majority of people disobey the laws, government will be helpless, as no amount of a force can quell the majority if they are dead against the government which they wish to overthrow. Means consent and support should be present from citizens to the government. Then only the government can peacefully administer the state. These are the grounds of political obligation. Next, the following reasons to explain why the individual obeys the state. So first is the need of the state. Most of the citizens are aware that the state has a purpose. It has to protect them, uphold their rights, and serve their multifarious needs in their own interest. They should cooperate with it and obey its laws and orders. So need of the state. Second, fear of disorder and anarchy. The fear that if the disorder and anarchy erupt, their lives and their property might be in a great danger makes a citizen law abiding. As a rule, human beings who desire to have peace and order can never imagine of living in a lawless society. Next is the matter of habit and tradition. In a family in which much importance is given to the disciplined conduct, it becomes a habit with all the members to be a good, courteous, and helpful. So also in a well-ordered state, it is a habit among its citizens to be a peace-loving and law-abiding. So matter of habit and tradition. For this fear of punishment, some citizens consider that disobedience is unpleasant and painful. They obey laws because they wish to avoid the punishment with its ill effects. Fifth, respect for might of a state. Some citizens obey laws only because they have wholesome respect for the might of the state, which they are aware of or forced to realize they cannot challenge successfully. So there is a respect for might of a state. Sixth is about the religion. A religious factor is also responsible for obedience. In ancient and medieval states, the hold of religion on the people was great, and at instance of religious leaders, the people readily obeyed the government. A king could easily win the loyalty and obedience of his subjects if their religion happened to be the same as his own. So religion. Seventh is about the legitimacy of a source of a law. A law is obeyed wholeheartedly by citizens if its source is legitimate. This means that the government which makes the laws should be constitutional and legal. People will revolt against the laws made by a tyrant who has usurped power. Seventh is legitimacy of a source of a law. And the eighth is about the rationality and usefulness of a law. People will readily obey law if they are found to be rational and useful. So here we have seen the following reasons why the individual obeys the state. So next are the important questions. Reasons and causes on which the ground people accept and obey the state. So for this you have to write all these reasons. Next is why do people obey the political obligation? Same reasons we have to write. Is the obedience of the people is conditional allowed in a political obligation, means if the government implements lawful laws then the people are binded to follow the government, but if it implements the unjust laws then the people can revolt against it. On which grounds the obedience and resistance is conditional, justify. So for this you have to write the reasons. And what are the ways people can use to refuse object the government, means civil ways. We will see this in next part. What are the limits of political obligation and whether the disobedience in the political obligation is conditional. These are the important questions. Next is the what is obligation. The term obligation originates from a Latin word obligate, which means the performance of a duty. Liability, duty is responsibility. It is an act which binds a person to some performance. It is a binding power of a duty, promise, or a contract. An individual has to follow rules of behavior in society for his own good and for the good of others. The state was established to meet the need of the individual and society. The proper functioning of a state depends upon a well organized system of duties. There are two words in political obligation: political plus obligation.